Hey, hope you're doing all right. In this tutorial today, we're going to talk about testing your React app with a library called Cypress. So let's go ahead and dive right in. I have an older project. I've got a video for this, but if you don't feel like going through that and setting it up yourself, that's fine. The repo will be in the comments. So I'm in the root directory. I've got both a client directory and then a top level directory here. So from the top level, I'm going to do npm run dev, and that'll get our server going and connect our front end and back end. And then I'm going to open up a new terminal and change directories into client. And then I'm going to add our Cypress dependency. So I'm using yarn. You can use npm, that's fine. So yarn adds Cypress as a dev dependency. And you'll do -- save dev if you're running npm. So now that that's going, let's add a script to our client package JSON. So make sure you're in the client directory, and we can see our dev dependency has been added, Cypress. So in test, we're going to change this to say Cypress open. And then down here, making sure we're in client in our terminal, we can run npm test. And so by doing that, we're actually going to get a couple of things. We're going to get a new Cypress directory where we can create our tests and look at examples and do some configuration and stuff. And then we'll also get a cypress.json where we can do our kind of top level configuration. Okay, so when we run Cypress open, as opposed to Cypress run, which I'll show you a little bit later, Cypress open actually opens up this little window, and then we can visually see our tests running in an actual browser. So it gives you all of these examples, and to avoid it running all of these examples for us, what I'm going to do is just change this examples directory, change the name of it. So in Cypress, you can see this new folder we've got. In integration, and then /examples, I'm going to right click on examples and hit rename, and then just do dot at the front. And so now you see there's no files. So let's create our first actual test. But before we do that, in our cypress.json file, we can do some configuration that is going to help us from, repeating ourselves a couple of times. So the first thing that we're going to do is create a base URL. And so this will be a reference point for running our tests. If you want to run tests on different pages, different locations of your application, then you'll be able to branch off of this base URL rather than typing in localhost 3000 or whatever it is every single time. So in our case, our base URL is http://localhost 3000. And so now we can save that and go back into our Cypress directory inside of integration. So with VS Code, it's got this examples directory, but there's nothing else in integration. So on integration, I'm going to right click. I'm going to say new file, and I'll just say homepage.js. They do have in their docs kind of a naming convention, and you can see it in their examples where they have .spec.js. You can do that, but you don't necessarily need to, so I'm just going to leave it off. And so let's go ahead and write our first test. So we start off with kind of a big bucket describe, where we have the name. So we'll say it renders the home page. And then after that, we'll have an anonymous function. And this is where we'll write our individual tests. So we'll start these off with it. So we'll say it renders correctly. And then again, an arrow function, anonymous function, and inside of that, we'll have our content. So we'll say cy.visit / so we're just visiting the home page. Now we can do this / because in our cypress.json we have our base URL. So that's already a nice little feature keeping it dry for us. So we'll visit it, and then from there we are going to cy.get. This is kind of similar to like jQuery selectors. So we're going to look for something with an ID of container, and we are just going to say that it should exist. So let's give this a save. Now we can see in our little Cypress window here, you can choose the different browsers that you want to run in. I'm going to keep it in Chrome, and I can just click on Homepage. This is going to open it up for us. And so this is pretty cool. Already it's rendering our page. You can see it. It visited the home page, and you can see it's loading, and you can actually hover over that and you can see the loading state. But then when we get to this container part, it fails. So it looks for container, but it never found it. And by default, it's going to try for 4 seconds. So the reason is that container doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and make it exist. Inside of our app.js, we have some Tailwind classes for styling, and we can just add an ID of container. And now if we run this again, and that was super quick, I'll run it again, but it found the ID of container, and now that test is passing. So let's go ahead and get our second test going. And for this, we're going to use a cool feature in Cypress called their experimental studio. So in cypress.json, we've got experimental studio, and we'll set this to true. So this is going to be actually a pretty cool little feature. It's experimental right now. I'm on version 6.5, and this is February of 2021. I think they came out with it in 6.3, so with this experimental studio. I'm not sure how long it'll be experimental, but check back, and it might be a full-fledged feature at the time you're watching this. So save that. And now we click on Homepage again. Okay, so we've still got our tests. So let's write a second test that will help us, or that we can utilize that experimental studio feature. So back to our homepage, we'll say it, and we'll say allows the date picker to be used. And so here's a good use case. I don't know exactly, let's say I don't know exactly what the date picker, like how it can be accessed or whatever. I can use this studio to kind of help me out and point me in the right direction. So we're going to do our cy.visit. We'll visit the home page, and then we're not going to write anything else ourselves just yet. So let's save. Cannot read property all games of undefined. Cool. So this testing suite is already helping me find some errors in our code. Let's go ahead and take a look. So all games. Let's see, app.js. No. Let's check our games component. All games. Okay, so here, what's happening in the code is this is actually being taken care of by Apollo if loading, return loading. But it's a good method to also make sure that we have data. So I'm going to use, I'm going to put a question mark after data. And this is just called conditional chaining. So instead of doing something like data and data.allGames. What we'll do instead is we'll say data. If there's data, cool, then give me data.allGames. And you could do this if we had kind of more deeply nested. You could do something like this. You could do as many of these as you want. And it's a little bit, it looks a little weird, but it's a little bit more clean than doing the bunch of ands. So save that, refresh our tests. Cool. So now we're passing. And so for this one, we want, all this test is doing is visiting the home page. So we want the date picker to be used. So you might have noticed over here, there's this little wand icon and it says add commands to test. The first caveat here is that your test does need to be passing. So it won't let you add a command to a test that's failing. So if you're running into that issue and you've made some progress on a test or whatever, you can comment out or delete the sections of your test that aren't passing yet, and then click on the magic wand, add your commands, and then add those pieces of your test back in afterward. So let's check this out. So I'm going to click on this. It's going to run my test, so it does visit, and now we're in this studio beta. So I want to click on this. It got the date and clicked on it. I'm going to type in some stuff, so I'll do 02. Oh, it doesn't look like it's letting me, but this actually might be helpful. So let's save these commands. Typing into a date input with cy.type requires a valid date with the format this, and you passed in 0. So that actually is helping us by throwing this error. But let's take a look at what happened. So in our home page, you can see we got this code that was generated with Cypress Studio. We didn't have to type in anything. So it got our date, and it said to type some stuff. And so this is what I love about Cypress Studio is it's not going to write all of my tests for me, but it's going to point me in the right direction as to what I should be doing. So it found the date, and it told me that I'm typing stuff. I just need to fix this typing part. So let's look at the format. So year, month, day, and we want it to be a date in the past. So we'll do like February 17th. The reason that we're doing this is if we're testing, we don't know necessarily what the date is going to be and which games are going to be played on that date. However, if we choose a date in the past, then in theory, all of those games should be completed, and we should expect the same data to come back each time. So let's type in 2021 02 17. And so I'll save this, bring back over the testing. Sweet. So it does render correctly. It allows the date picker to be used. So it selected this date for us. So the date is February 21st, but it changed it to February 17th, and now we get all of these different games. And so let's make sure, too, that we're checking to see that these games exist. So let's go ahead and for this, what we're going to do actually is if you've used React testing library, we're going to add a plugin that helps us to kind of add on to this cy get, and we can actually find stuff by text instead. So I'm going to close out and kill this terminal. I'm going to leave the other one running. And I'm going to add another dependency. So I'm going to do yarn add at testing -library / Cypress with the dev flag. And while that's installing, I'll show you where I'm getting these from. So in Cypress on their docs page, if you go to plugins, they've got a ton of different plugins for different things. Things like authentication, mocking data, different helpers, things like that. And so we're grabbing Cypress testing library, which helps you write commands similar to how you would with React testing library. So it'll make it a little bit easier and extendable in terms of finding different pieces of your app. So going back here, this is installed, so we can run npm test again. And so what we want to do is let's take a look at our actual application that's running, and let's flip it to February 17th. And we want to find some sort of text. We'll find a team. Let's make sure that it's not showing up twice. So we have the Hornets and Bulls maybe showing this. So the Bulls are here. Okay, so the Celtics, it looks like they're just showing up once. So we can find that text. So back over in our app, we can do cy.find by text Boston Celtics should exist. If we hit save, run our test again, cy.find by text is not a function. Let's make sure that this is installed in our package JSON. Testing library Cypress, okay. The reason that this is failing is because I forgot a step. So I'm going to close this, move this over. There's one extra piece that I need to do, and I'll show you how to do it. In our plugins, if you go to Cypress testing library, it's going to open up their documentation. And so it shows you the step that I just did with I did yarn, but npm install. You also need to import this. So sometimes it'll be in this support folder, sometimes it'll be elsewhere in the Cypress directory, but I'm just going to copy this and then flip back over to the app. And inside of support commands, I'm just going to paste this in and save it. And now we should be back in business. Sweet. So it does allow the date picker to be used. We can see that it went to the home page, it got the date, it switched it to this date, then it found by text. And I should be able to switch that to back to find by text. That would work as well. Okay, so last, we're going to write one more test. So I'm going to close out of this and close commands. And we'll do it routes to a team's page. And so for this, we're going to do a couple of extra little cool things. So inside of our describe, you'll notice that the start of each of our tests has this cy.visit. Instead of typing that a bunch of times, what we can do is at the top of our describe, we can do before cy.before each, and then we can just pass in a function, and we can do cy.visit. And let's get rid of these visits. I might not need the cy. I need to check. We'll just run it and see. Okay, that's what I thought. So let's get rid of that cy and just run before each. And so now it handles that visit for us each time without us having to explicitly write it. So that's kind of a nice little helper. Next thing that we're going to do is let's say that we were going to reuse this Boston Celtics, and we will just to kind of show this point. So let's grab this Boston Celtics and copy. And then in our cypress.json, we're going to add another property called env. And it's going to be an object. And this part we can call whatever we want. I'll say Celtics. And then this is our value, Boston Celtics. So this is what we're going to reference it as. This is going to be kind of like our constant, and then this is going to be the value. So we can now use this if we were going to reuse Boston Celtics multiple times. So inside of homepage, we can go to the top, and we can say const Celtics. Actually, let's do this in all caps. Celtics equals Cypress .env Celtics. And so then here we can cut this out and we can just reference the variable, that constant Celtics. And if we run this again, that should work as well. And it does, it's still passing. So let's use that in our next test. So we'll route to the teams page. We're actually going to use this part again. So we'll get to that same date. We should make sure that Celtics exists. And then we'll do find all by text Celtics. And we'll do a .click. So this will click on that link. Then we'll check the URL. And we'll say it should include. And then teams/2, because that's the Celtics ID, and that's how our routing system is set up. And then we'll also do a CY find by text. And we'll say conference East. And this should also exist. And so let's watch this in action here. Sweet. So if we run that one more time, you can watch this route to the teams page. So I clicked on it, URL's there, you see Conference East, it's the Boston Celtics page, so pretty cool, and you can just watch that happen. A couple of last helpful things, depending on your sort of like use case, is I mentioned earlier that if you have a like a QA or staging site and you want to set up kind of like different environments for that, then what you could do is, this is one method. So in the same level as cypress.json, I'm going to add a new file. So let's go to client, new file, and let's say it's like cypress.staging.json. And so for here, what we would do is you could update any of these properties, any of these values if you have different like environment variables or anything like that. And then the cool thing is in this base URL, you could do like, mystagingsite.com, whatever your staging site is. And then from there, it'll just reference that URL. It'll actually pop this up and that'll work for you. And so then in our package JSON, what we can do is add another script, and we could say like test QA. And then what we'll do is we'll say Cypress open --config file, and relative to our package.json, we'll say ./cypress.staging.json. And so this, I don't think this is going to work because mystagingsite.com may or may not be a real site. But let's do npm run test QA. And so you can see it's opening up this or referencing this staging.json. So we could not, if we, mystagingSite.com might not be running. So if I open this up, it's again probably not going to work. But you can see mystagingSite.com now as opposed to localhost. So none of this is going to work. I'm going to stop it. But that's how you would set that up. Another thing is if you wanted to run this in the terminal instead, that's as easy as just switching this to Cypress run and then save. And so now if I run my npm test, it's not going to open up that browser. It instead is going to run all of my tests inside of the terminal. So my tests are passing. I get my results. It's a nice little table. You can also see that there's this videos that pops out a little recording. So if you did want to access that, it would have the MP4 file for you. If you wanted to turn that off, you could just do video. I think it's either video or videos false. You can check the documentation for that. So quick little rundown intro to testing a React app with Cypress. I've got links to this repo in the before testing phase, and then a link to the Cypress documentation. So if you have questions, check out their docs, and then if stuff still isn't making sense, you have more questions, then let me know in the comments below. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.